Well, Jerry's got a little preparatory work to do here, and while she's getting ready, I'll go ahead and give you a quick little talk on what buckskin is.
So what exactly is buckskin? Buckskin is not a leather. It's not tanned leather is what we think of as leather. Buckskin is softened rawhide in essence. What we utilize to soften this, besides elbow grease, are the brains of an animal. That's where the name brain tan comes from. And looking at this skin, you say, wow, a piece of flannel or wool. This is what we think. It's got air spaces in it. But obtaining this can be a real mystery unless you know some real simple rules. We have here rawhide. Okay, this is a raw deer skin. It's been stretched out and it's been fleshed and cleaned up and the hair has been removed, and it's just parchment. Original parchment was rawhide, and you're not going to wear this. It's not going to do you a bit of good. You can make some containers and other items out of it, but for clothing it's not doing a bit of good. What we're trying to do is to turn that rawhide into this soft skin. Okay. Well, one of the aspects of this rawhide is the fact is if we boil it down, we take scrapings of rawhide and we boil it down, what we'll end up with is glue. Now these are glue sticks that we've made by boiling down pieces of hide and putting them on an end of a stick, and we can reconstitute. Furniture makers used them for years. Well, turning that rawhide into softened buckskin is a problem. You have to really envision a few things. One major thing are fibers. The skin itself is constituted of fibers. Literally millions and millions of fibers constitute this skin. There's not really pores. It's like a cotton ball, or these are fibers of bark, and it's just millions and millions of these fibers together. Now I'm going to take a second and show you some close-up fibers of this, which is a piece of brain tan beaver. Really thick fiber, really thick skin, so we can show you some good fibers.
Now this is a cross section of that piece of beaver. Now notice the fibers. Just millions and millions of interlocked fibers. This is what we're dealing with.
Okay, now you've seen the actual fibers. Now let me illustrate a little of this on the chalkboard here to kind of give you a little bit better idea of what we're talking about. First, we're going to call yellow the dermis, D-E-R-M-I-S, the dermis portion of the skin. This is the fibers. This is what we're trying to make soft. Okay, on the outside of the skin, the hair side, we have a thin layer of membrane, which is known as the epidermis, E-P-I-D-E-R-M-I-S. On the epidermis grows the hair or the fur. On the inside of the skin, we have layers of fat, meat, and membrane. Now, these have to be removed. So what we do is, in the process of what we're going to show you, is we initially first remove the meats, the fats, and the membrane on the inside of the skin. And then we allow it to dry. After it's dried, we go back with a scraper and we remove the hair, and at the same time the epidermis. This has to be removed. So what we have left is a bundle of fibers. These fibers that we've been talking about. Okay, they are in the form right now of rawhide. What we have to do to prevent this from turning back into the glue sticks that we spoke of. What we have to do is treat this skin. We treat it with what? Brains. Brains is what we're calling this brain tan. Forget brains, the word brains. What we're doing is we're treating it with oils. There are very, very fine oils that are comprised in the brain. So what we're going to do is apply a brain mixture to the skin, and we'll saturate oils throughout all these fibers. And what that does is it allows us, if we manipulate the fibers, manipulate the skin as we work, as it dries, if we keep the fibers moving, what that does is it allows the skin to dry soft. What that means is the fibers will stay separated. You'll have separated fibers. You have softened rawhide. Now you can use a variety of oils to do this. There is an oil tan. You can use heavier oils, and it will coat these fibers, and it will be finished when it's done. But you won't be able to breathe through it, and it'll be much heavier. The air spaces will all be filled. In brain tan, what we have is very, very fine oils that coat and saturate these fibers. But water can also penetrate through these oils. So if the skin was to be wetted once again, water would penetrate through the oils into the fibers. The fibers would again be wetted with water. And then as it dried, it would turn into rawhide again, just what we had to begin with. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take you through step by step of turning all of this into a softened rawhide or buckskin, piece of buckskin. Now, one of the very final steps, when we get done making it soft, we end up with a very soft piece of skin that we can actually blow air through, and it manipulates around in all directions. Very, very, very soft. But if this got wet again, it would dry hard as rawhide, because water would reach the fibers, turning it to glue as it dried, unless we again work the skin. So the final step in brain tanning is to apply smoke to it. There's many methods of doing this. We'll show you one or two. We need to saturate the skin with smoke, and it really doesn't take much. It can just be a little bit, but we need to coat the fibers of the skin. Once the fibers are coated, and then they're waterproof, there's a pitch, creosote, and smoke. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but my theory is that this pitch or creosote is coating all these millions of individual fibers, and so we're not getting a waterproof skin, because I can still blow through it, I can dump water through it, but what I have is the fibers are waterproof. So when the skin gets wet again, it will dry soft. So what we'll do is we'll just continue on, go back, find out.
Okay, here Jerry, she's trimming the excess ragged edges off. She's laid it within the frame of 2x4s. Now we're pretty close to the edge of the frame, you'll note. That eliminates having to use such an awful lot of cordage when you lace it on there. You notice the ragged edging on this side is compared over on the left side of the screen, where she's trimmed around the flank. What it does is it gives you more of a elliptical shaped product to work with, and you're not trying to finish out and soften all the scraggly corners and hang-me-downs as you go, which when we reach that point you'll see where there's a problem. Okay, once the skin is trimmed, and then you fit the frame around the outside, so it's about 8 or 10, 12 inches around. You'll eventually, when you tighten it up, you'll pull the skin to the edge, so you use a minimal amount of cordage. Now this will be the bottom part of the skin, and you'll note that the bottom 2x4 sticking out on the two ends are about equal, so that when you stand it up later, it'll stand up straight. The next step is to go all the way around the peripheral of the skin and poke in holes. These are poked in approximately an inch from the edge, 2 or 3 inches apart. All the way around. You'll notice she's going, that she's taking the knife, pushing it down into the skin on top of a piece of wood, and then pulling the skin up. This saves the edge of the knife, and you want the cutting edge away from the hand that's pulling, so that you don't inadvertently slice your hand open. Now we have a method we utilize around here is where we always start at the same spot of the skin every time, which is the upper left-hand corner as it lays on the ground here. That's the left side of the neck as you're facing the flesh side of the skin. We start punching our holes from that direction. We start lacing from that spot. That way, if Jerry has to run off or something, or I have to run off, whoever's doing the work, the other can jump right in and pick up as they go. Now, in the lacing process, we're utilizing approximately 1/8 inch diameter nylon rope, and we go through 2 or 3 holes at a time. Bring the rope out underneath of the frame, back over the top, and then through 2 or 3 more. This allows the skin to lie flat as it dries. And as you reach the natural corners of the skin, you'll go to the corner of the frame and back in. Now, a lot of people seem to have trouble in placing the skin square in the frame. Well, as you start, if you go across the top and down the right hand side and just let the skin lie in its natural position within the frame, and then don't start tightening the cords until you reach the bottom. As you come across the bottom, you'll snug it up a little bit, and then as you come up the far side, tighten it severely. And as you'll see as we go, the skin will naturally stay centered in the frame and be tight. Okay, here Jerry has gone around the bottom. She's going up to the last side, and she's really pulling it tight. And we've had a lot of people say, boy, there's easy ways to stretch a skin out. All you need to do is have hooks and ropes and rubber cords and all kinds of little slick tricks, but the hundreds and hundreds of skins that we've done here, we found this is the quickest, the simplest, and the easiest way to do it. From the time Jerry lays it, fresh skin or frozen skin out, builds the frame, and then laces it and fleshes it, is 1.5 hours.
Now, as you can see, the skin is pretty much squared in the frame. Now that she's standing it up, she's going around and tightening it really good. Now, as she goes across the bottom, she will pull just snug, not over tight. That is the weakest part of the skin right now, and it will tear out easily. So she just pulls it up snug. Now, going up the final side where she's at, she'll really snug it tight. Really get it tight, because you want the skin tight within the frame. This way it doesn't flop around on you as you're fleshing. Jerry's taking the one tool that is used on this entire operation. We use one tool, which we'll cover in detail pretty quick. And she's beginning to open up on the flesh side of the skin. She starts at the top, at the neck. She gets an opening, and then she pulls that down. She has to use sometimes the edge of the scraper blade to cut through the meat and the membrane and the fat in order to get it started. Once it gets started, it starts going on down, it'll pretty much just pull off. Almost the process of peeling it. What you're seeing here is a hole caused by a knife cut. It was done when this deer was skinned. It's a pretty sloppy job of skinning. You see all those lines cutting through the meat and into the skin. Well, those holes, those lines cutting into the skin, those can ruin a skin. Because in the final process of this turning out buckskin, you're stretching this skin, pulling it one way and then the other, manipulating the fibers, and when you really get to pulling them, you can just tear holes out where none are visible right now. Okay, here's another example. This is down towards the tail end, the butt of the animal. It just literally almost ruins this portion of the skin. Most of those little scores that you see will tear out and become holes. Okay, you can see Jerry's getting down pretty good, and this isn't such bad skin to work. Membrane and meat, fats are separating pretty readily from the skin. Now you'll notice up where she's working right now, there are scores, and because of that, she's taking her tool and working crosswise to the scores. If she was to go up and down on those, she could pop a hole through pretty easily. Okay, the membrane, the meats, the fats, they alternate in lying against the dermis, or the skin. In some points, the membrane might be right against the dermis. In other points, it might be a layer of fat or a layer of meat. It all has to be removed. The fats in the meat are pretty self-explanatory. They'll rot, especially if wetted. The fats, if left on, will do what we call grease burn the skin. And it will weaken it so that when you work it, it'll tear into thousands of holes. Now, the meat, if this was a deer that we had killed and left this much meat on and put up right away, we could take this meat and dry it and utilize it, or even just cook it as it is. There's nothing wrong with it. We don't know this particular deer, how it was cared for, so we'll be a little bit more careful. Now the membrane will prohibit oils from passing through it. Now it's soaked long enough, water will seep through it, but the oils are heavier than water and they will not penetrate through the membrane. So if you happen to leave a piece of this membrane on the skin and inadvertently it's left there through the entire process, oils will not penetrate through there, and they may not come in far enough from the sides to lubricate the fibers with the dermis underneath of it. So a quarter-sized piece of membrane left behind can turn around and leave you a dime-sized, stiff, hard piece, because you can't take the rawhide and soften it without it having been coated with oils first. Now this is one stage of the process where Jerry cannot quit at any time. This fleshing has to be done while the skin is in a wet condition. And she has a bucket of water or a pan of water nearby, and if it does begin to dry, she'll wet it as she goes, because wherever the membrane or meat dries to the skin, you cannot easily remove it in this way. You can't predictably remove it at all, as far as I'm concerned. Now there's many ways to preserve a skin. We do what we feel is the easiest and the best way, is we freeze them. After we collect them from hunters or slaughterhouses or from ourselves as we shoot them each year, what we do is we immediately roll them up, hair side out, and then seal them in plastic garbage bags and put them in a freezer. We rent a locker expressly for that purpose. And we freeze anywhere from 50 to 100 skins each year. We don't necessarily tan that many ourselves, but we have students who go through them on a pretty regular basis. And when you take a frozen skin out, as this one was, and unroll it, it's the same as if you took a fresh killed skin. Well, naturally, most Aboriginal people just didn't have access to refrigeration unless you were Eskimo. So, a couple of good viable opportunities for preserving the skin would be in drying them. Was a good one. Initially, they might just take and lay them over a tree limb or something to let them dry. Many times they'll flesh them first, or remove the best major portion of the flesh, and just let them dry until whenever, as long as they weren't wetted again, and then they could be kept indefinitely, the same as dried meat. Now, another good alternative, especially for modern day, is salting them. You can preserve skins by salting them. You can leave the flesh and fats on it and just liberally coat them with plenty of salt, and then stack them on each other and allow them to drain, because salt will leach some liquid from it. And now, to utilize or work with these skins, a dried skin has to be re-soaked. Well, that can take several hours, sometimes more than a day. And the same with a salted skin. It has to be rejuvenated, but all the salt needs to be washed out. Well, this creates a problem in the effect that if you're in a hurry, you're dampening the epidermis on the hair side plus the hair. And so it takes a lot longer for this to dry out. And in our situation, we're like to take a skin and do it. When we feel like tanning a skin, we just want to tan it. Utilizing the method that we'll be showing you here, it's really possible to shoot a deer first thing in the morning and to wear that deer, a finished product of buckskin, that evening. And we've been all around the country within the last several years, teaching and visiting and learning from other tanners, and we still have not found an easier, faster method to turn out good buckskin. There are people who do some very fine quality buckskin, but they don't do it as fast as we do. Now when you reach around the legs, that's the front left leg she's working on now, around the legs and even along the flanks down the side, instead of pulling the flesh straight down the skin, we find that it's easier to pull it out to the side. Now in the legs, the front leg where she's at and the hind legs also, the membranes seem to overlap. It seems to be more than one layer. And so this, to us, is the easiest way of removing that. Now we take this as close to the edge as we can. Now, in our method of tanning, we'll cut off approximately 1 inch of the skin. You have to be careful if you get over anxious and you're greedy, try to save every little bit. You can cut these ropes and then you just get the pain in the neck of putting it back together again. If you haven't noticed as of now, there's really a very minimal of equipment and materials required to tan a skin. 2x4s or something heavier if you're going to work on larger, heavier hides like buffalo, elk, or even cow. Or poles can be used, lashed or nailed together. A hammer and a handful of nails. A heavy-duty rope. Here we use a lariat. For finishing, it will be tied off to a pole or a tree, and we'll work our skin over this. A knife of sorts. A cord of sort will be necessary. We generally use this 1/8 inch diameter nylon rope, but also have used baling twine often. At one point we'll be wringing all the moisture out of the skin, and generally we use this hand wringer. We'll also show you the primitive method of using a stick. We need a bucket or pan or two for water and cooking brains. And of course, we need the brains. In this case, we buy them at the local supermarket. They can also be obtained from the animal. Now we have a skin, if we were to leave the hair on, would be ready for the brains. But now we need to let it completely dry before we go to the next step. Note how clean the skin is compared to the little corner left that Jerry's working on. There's nothing left on there. You'll note later we'll use sandpaper to touch up to see in the event we may have missed something. But in this method of fleshing, we go over it one time and this is it. 1 hour and 30 minutes at the outside for our largest, toughest skins. From the time we take the frozen skin out
until she's... Now we mentioned the one tool that's necessary, in fact is in our case critical, that does everything that we do. This is it. The blade is of a heavy, high carbon steel. In our case, it's a file, simple file we've broken off. That's the tool that Jerry's been using. Now she'll reach down and grab the metal blade. Bring that up. Okay, hold that up so they can see the facing part of it. There you go. Okay. You zoom in on that. We'll that blade is simply made. What we like about a file is the fact that it's cheap. You can buy a brand new file for $6 or $7 or $8 and get 3 blades that'll last you a lifetime. Now you can buy used ones at a flea market yard sale for $1/4 to $1 a piece, and you just put it in the vise and break it off, and the bottom will be semi-square. Show the bottom, move your fingers here a little bit, and the bottom will be pretty square, and the top part you will take to a stone grinder, electric grinder, or hand grinder in our case, and round it. That rounded edge is critical, because if it had a sharp edge as compared to the bottom, you would very easily and readily tear into the skin and rip it apart as you were working. Now I'll turn it sideways for us, Jerry, and we'll get a good close-up. Lower it down or to your... Yeah, right there is perfect. Now notice, I'm going to come in real tight on that. The bevel that we've got on that blade is approximately, I'll say 20-25 degree angle. And we sharpen it at that angle, severe an angle to begin with. And then when we work with it, we take our whetstone and we bring that edge to approximately 45 degree angle. And generally we can do 2 skins, just taking it to the whetstone before we have to take it back and regrind it on the grinding wheel. Now, we showed you an antler handle. Antler is really nice, it's heavy, but grab up a wooden one there and we'll show that. Move that around, let them see it a little bit. Now this is the first handle that I had ever made. It's made out of a piece of Osage orange. And the blade is just simply fastened to the end. Turn it sideways so I can come in on the blade. There you go. Simply fastened to it. And that's done well over 100 skins for me. So you can simply go out and just cut a piece of heavy wood. The heavier the handle, the easier the work will be when you go. Now also, if you're not handy at all, you can't go out and cut down a tree, you can't find a limb, you can just go to a blacksmith and grab, have them make you a handle out of heavy strap metal. On this piece here, we make them up for students. It doesn't cost $5 to have a piece made. They bend it off at a 90 degree angle. And again, you just simply lash the blade to the part that's bent over. And the heavy weight of this 1/2-inch strap iron, it really does the work for you. So getting a handle is simple. And the book that comes with this video has on the inside front cover a photograph of everything that we just shown you. So if you have to take it to someone to make it for you, you just take along the book and you'll have everything right there. Now here Jerry is putting on the approximately 45 degree angle working edge on the top and sides of that blade. Now for this next step, the dehairing of the deer, super sharp blade is critical. You cannot have this blade too sharp. Now notice that her finger is well back on that sharpening stone. A matter of safety here is that I used to sharpen it with my finger forward on the stone, and I brought the stone back too far one time and brought my fingertip down on top of that blade, right to the bone. It wasn't so bad the first time, but a week later, when I did it the second time, I learned to put my finger back where it's at. Now, a safer way to sharpen this would be to lay the stone down and to drag the blade across the stone. You have to rotate the blade as you do this to make sure you get all sides of it. But that sharpness is critical. Now when we get to dehairing, our next step, you'll be sharpening this stone 8 or 10 or 12 times in the process of the dehairing. Now the skin on the right, we just fleshed. You saw how that went. Not too much problem. It needs to dry before we go to the next step. That can take several hours. In order to expedite things, we're going to go to one that we already have stretched. You can see where the skin has been opened up. The strip has been opened across the top and starting down the center. This is how we start dehairing all of our skins. Now generally we dehair completely across the top. Here is where you're going to find the sharpness of your blade being critical. Combination of sharpness of blade and dryness of skin. If you have an extremely sharp blade and a dry skin, and then things generally work out, it's like just peeling that off. You'll see it in close-up pretty quick. There are times when you have to work on a really humid day, when the skin is just slightly damp, well, the epidermis becomes rubbery. You can work a skin, but it can be a bear. Now when we dehair a skin, we work in an area approximately 1 inch wide. Now because of the curvature of this blade, we're removing hair and epidermis from an area approximately 1/4 of an inch wide. Now, there is not applying an extreme amount of pressure at this time. At times it requires more. Now, every time you run that blade down, you create a valley and 2 ridges. You go back and try to remove the ridges. And then you're creating more ridges. And you try to remove those. As you see the epidermis leaving, this will be the hardest part of the whole tanning process, is for you to see the epidermis leaving. As you see that it's gone, and then you move on to your next inch wide area. Now she's moving slowly across here. And we'll get in, we'll get some extreme close-ups of this to show you the epidermis. I can't describe what it looks like. In this particular case, it looks a little off-color, brownish, yellowish, compared to the white of the skin. It doesn't always show anything at all. Sometimes you can't see it. In the flanks, it's going to be a different characteristic than it will be in the back, than it will be in the hams, than it will be in the shoulders. It's different all over. You can't say any one characteristic shows what the epidermis looks like. here's a pretty close-up shot of what you just saw Jerry go over. Now, along the hairlines at the bottom, you'll see these little ridges coming up where her downward stroke ended. And you can plainly see the epidermis and even some hair follicles. And then you can see where she has finished. Now, the upper part, it seems rather rough. That can be evened out by some sideward strokes with a scraper. Or what we usually do is we go over it later with sandpaper, and that smooths that out. Not only for cosmetic purposes, but in the event that we've missed some epidermis, the sanding can pick it up, and that has saved some skins for us. Okay, now you'll notice on the extreme upper portion of your screen where we have gone across sideways with a scraper to smooth it. That's not really critical for obtaining buckskin, but cosmetically it sometimes is nice. Now note Jerry is doing that 1-inch wide trick again, but her upper strokes are overlapping where she left off below. So keep her eyes peeled about in the center of where her stroke is taking place. And trusting that her overlapping top and bottom will pick up what she's not eyeballing. Alright, now this is a good extreme close-up. On the right side of the screen, there's a lot of epidermis left. At a point where my knife blade is touching down, to the left, that area is clean of epidermis. This area over here shows all types of epidermis. You have to learn to see this. I hope this shows well on your screen at home. It is very, very hard to see. You have to think of epidermis not as a sheet of membrane like what you have on the flesh side, but it is more like a coating of sandpaper. It's a sandy type of surface. It's made up of millions of tiny dots. If you can think of or even look at the grain side of leather on your belts or boots or purses or whatever you may have, that is the grain. If you look close, you'll see thousands of tiny dots. If you learn to think of epidermis in that way, as dots, not as a single sheet, it will help you to see it. Also to help you to see is putting the sun at a good extreme angle off to one of your left or right shoulders and coming down. We've had some students leave here and go home and they hook up 250 watt light bulbs up to the corner of their frame and have it shooting down, and the shadows that it casts illuminates the epidermis form really clearly. We just have learned to see it as we go, and eventually after you do several skins you will also. What's this, a third skin? It's amazing what you can do in TV and movies. You just make anything happen. So don't believe just everything you see. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit what we've got here. Skin on the right, we fleshed out. Took us approximately an hour and a half, start to finish. Basically, we never have to touch that side again. Okay, the skin in the center, we demonstrated some dehairing. Critical, not any more critical than any other part, the hardest to learn part. The skin on the left we've already dehaired. It saves us another hour and a half's work. That's approximately how long it takes to dehair, anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 hours. That's for us. For you, you can expect the first few times to spend a little bit extra. Skinning. If you can skin the deer yourself, you're so much far ahead.
Leave the knife out. Just use it to open the animal up, and use your fist to push between the meat and the skin. And generally you won't have this big layer of meat left on the skin. And we've told packers or other hunters who don't bring them to us and don't allow us to skin, we've told them to just go ahead, and if they're in a hurry and they don't want to take the time to fist it, which really isn't that much longer, but to leave the meat on the skin. Don't try to cut it off. It's discardable meat anyhow for most people. And to take the knife and use the knife cut in towards the animal, not towards the skin. This way we don't ruin skins. You saw how bad on the skin that we fleshed. We're going to lose probably 1/3 of that skin because of that. Now both the other two skins there's not a score on them. There's a couple bullet hole marks on both, and that's it. So, to reach this stage, you've got a total of, 3 to 4 hours of labor. The fastest that we have ever done a skin from start to finish, which is about the size of the skin in the center, was 4.5 hours. We did this once in front of students. We didn't smoke it, the final step, because it was too windy. But we completely finished a deer in 4.5 hours. Okay, now the pot has boiling hot water. The brains are probably pretty well frozen yet, softening up. They've been out for a while. Now we're going to add the brains to the boiling hot water. You're not going to stick your fingers in such. We'll mash them up. What will happen here is the brains will stew for a few minutes, and they'll turn from the red to a gray. We have never had problems with, but we have heard of an incident with a person who brain tanned getting infection in a cut in his fingers by handling raw brains. And the infection was very, very serious. He almost lost his finger, almost his whole hand. We've never had that problem, but it doesn't mean we won't have that problem. Brains can be utilized raw. They do not have to be cooked at all. I always cook mine. I don't know why, I'm not afraid of handling raw brains. I do it all the time. But I've just learned to cook them, and so that's what I do. Sometimes we actually cook them on the stove. Generally we do as you see here. Add them to boiling hot water, and they'll stew. After another few seconds of this, when we're sure that we've pretty well cooked any organisms or diseases out of it, or if we're just comfortable with what's done, we'll transfer that to a bucket of cold water. Now what we're going to do is end up with lukewarm water. Now, we're after oils in the brain, not the brain solution itself. So the meat matter, that doesn't mean anything. You're not after the meat. You can discard that. You can run just so many square inches of skin through a package of brains, or a certain amount of brains. We know from trial and error that 1 pound of brains will easily do 1 average size skin. Generally, 2 skins could be done in 2-pound packages of brains. Sometimes though, we've used extremely large skins, gone with that ratio, and we found ourselves not getting enough oils into the skin, which means much, much more work later on. Well, now Jerry's going to transfer that over into a bucket of cold water. And that's all that's necessary. Now, you don't have to liquefy the brains at all. You can just apply the brains as they are to the skin and let the skin absorb nothing but oils. It would take time, usually overnight. And we've heard of Indians burying them in the ground and people rolling them up in trash bags or whatever to do. It works. The method we're going to show you is fast. It will take approximately 45 minutes for us to do this. What we're doing here is applying a diluted solution of the brain to the skin. And it should go pretty quick. You just put it on real fast, go over the entire skin. What we're doing is loosening the skin on the frame. We're going to cut it off. This just makes it pliable, easier to cut. We'll cut it off, roll it up, bundle it up, and put it into the bucket. Now we don't have to do this stage. We have taken skins, cut them up, rolled them up, put them in the house, and let them just be there. But this makes the skin pliable. We will end up doing both sides of the skin, just for our convenience. Now, where Jerry is pointing are holes from beetles, carrion beetles or carpet beetles or whatever in the devil they're called. They get into raw skins and they do eat holes in them. You have to be aware of them. They can really ruin some good skins. In this case, on both of our flanks, we've got holes going all the way through, and we'll end up cutting them out and sewing up the slits or just cutting them out completely. We're not sure. Skin's been wetted on both sides and we'll be cutting it off the frame now. Now you note we cut the skin from the previous hair side. There's a reason for that. You can follow the border of the hairline. If you attempt cutting from the other side, you don't know where the hairline's at. Pre-soaking it first just allows it to fold up a little nicer. Now we soak it in this solution 10 to 15 minutes to allow it to absorb moisture completely through. Thinner skins will take. We wring out excess moisture that we can by hand. And we're going to wring it around that rope. Sometimes easier said than done. What we're trying to do is make a donut into which we'll insert a stick and wring out all excess moisture.
This is a very, very effective means of doing it. A bit more time consuming than what we're going to go to from here, which is the wringer. Very efficient. We'll wring this as tight as we can. Now you could use a 2x4. In lieu of the rope. Now she's just going to take it apart and repeat the process. Switching it around halfway, so when she rings it this time, she'll be ringing at different points of the skin will be getting the tension of the ring. What we've got here is the old wringer trick. Saves a lot of time. Especially when you're doing a lot of skins. We want to wring out every bit of moisture of the skin that we can. Which means rolling it into a tight knot and rolling it through the wringer several times. You can run it through the wringer a dozen times and not roll it tight and not remove moisture. What we're doing at this point is we're introducing moisture into the skin in the form of water and oils. Water penetrates through the fibers faster than the oils because they're thinner. So we repeat this process several times. A skin this size, 8 to 10 or 12 times. We've never, very seldom ever gone over 20 times for an average deer skin or for any deer skin. Some of the heavier, maybe a bit more. We're removing every bit of moisture out of the skin. When we put it back into the bucket, it's drawing in water like a sponge does. The water is drawing oils with it. The oils are lubricating those fibers we've been talking about. So by wringing the skin dry, you're forcing oils back and forth and deeper into the fibers also, but you're removing not oils are staying, you're removing the water. So running it through the skin again and again, you're just drawing water and oils faster and faster. In about 45 minutes of braining, you can be done, ready to finish the skin out, which you'll see next. You can very easily not get enough oils into the skin. You cannot get too much. It is better to err on the plus side.
It used to be I could run a skin through as few as 3 times, or even some as once or twice the thinner skins to get the right amount of oils in it. But I've got burned. You don't know until several hours later when you've been physically breaking the skin apart that you haven't got enough oils. If you get what we feel is more than enough, it makes the skin that much easier for you to finish out. I use the word breaking. That's the wrong word. I'll discuss that here pretty quick.
Now you need to ensure to open the skin up every time after you've wrung it several times to get it dry before placing it back in the bucket. That allows the moisture to get in. Notice how short a period of time it was in there. It absorbs fast. You could leave the skin in the water for half an hour at a time in between. It's not going to do you any good. Once the skin is saturated with water and oils, it's saturated. So unless you're actually stirring it, now when we go into the brain solution, what we showed on that one trip was a little quick. Generally we figure 15-20 seconds gets maximum absorption. Now there's a considerable amount of solution left in the bucket, but this is about an average sized deer skin, and it's absorbed the majority of the oils that are in there. We started with about 1 gallon of water mixed with the brain. And right now, Jerry's on the final wringing. She's been through the brain solution and wringing out 15 times. This is her 15th time. 8 would probably have been enough. We've just found by experience that the more we do it, the more oils we add in, it makes it far easier to finish the skin out, which will be coming up pretty quick. Now what we're trying to do is remove as much moisture as we can from the skin, because from this point out it'll be air drying, and this can take several hours. Now for this hole, what it is, it's a double hole where the bullet exited. Jerry cut out the remaining. She'll cut the little tips sticking up on either end off. And then she'll just do an overhand sewing stitch. Pretty simple, even I can do that. So she's going through to create a loop, and she goes around it a couple times. I guess most people that sew know how to do that. And she'll whip stitch along the entire length of it. What this does is when we work the skin and we're stretching the fibers, the puckers which are evident now are stretched out because the fibers in those areas won't stretch quite so far, and you'll have a flat seam.
I have many times in the past patched holes, and it requires much more time and effort than it does to do it at this stage. And she'll finish off the knot the same way she started it. Well, you'll note that there's flies on the skin. The brains do not smell. Flies like to smell of it. It's a sweet. That's one of the things we really want to stress is you can do this in an apartment. You don't need to have 40 acres to tan a skin, or even a backyard. You can do this in a kitchen or a living room. If you drop down a sheet or something to catch the hair, the meat doesn't stink any worse than hamburger if it's been properly taken care of. And brains don't smell, they smell like brains. It's not a disagreeable odor at all. Now, after our final wringing, what we've done and what we do quite often is we've just laid this out to air dry. And now Jerry's going to pick it up, take it on over to the rope and begin stretching the fibers out and showing you what's the next process. This is the final part of actually working the skin. Now, starting at the neck, working towards the tail, we're stretching the skin sideways. I should say, Jerry is stretching the skin sideways. I'm watching along with you. What we're doing is stretching all the fibers in one direction. When she reaches the tail end of the deer, she'll turn the skin lengthwise and stretch all the fibers from head to tail, or tail to head. Remember what we're doing, stretching fibers. We're breaking nothing. Fibers have been lubricated by oils from the brain. All we are doing is keeping them moving on themselves while the skin dries. If we do this, the glue action will not take place. The fibers will dry separated, and you'll have soft, flannelly buckskin. Now what we're doing, giving you an illustration. The fact is that we're stretching fibers. Head to tail, just the same as with the rope. Just that the rope was an added person. We'll pull the edges somewhat. And we'll start again at the neck. Pull the fibers. Now I lied to you, it seems like a little bit ago. I said the skin was going to take several hours. We haven't been working on it for 45 minutes. It's getting awful close to done. Sometimes they can dry too fast on you. If you had more people, in pairs of twos, you could take this in a circle and just switch hand grips every once in a while and rotate the skin, pulling it so that one group would pull while the other let in, and then the other would pull. And that way all the fibers would just continually be working.
Now she better start shaking that thing because we're on camera. When we reach towards the final finishing stages of this skin, we're just going fast to fluff it up. She's basically dry. This is a different skin than the one we've been working. Some of the time the skin can be left out on a rail, clothesline, whatever, to just air dry some. But there's times and there's skins that you just can't let go. You have to keep working constantly. There'll be times when the skin will dry too fast on you. When that happens, it's going to dry up and shrink up. The glue takes over before you can get the fibers separated. Each one's different. Now notice how she pulls that skin and it springs back, boings back. Notice that. Pay attention to this. That's a really good indication that there's no moisture in it. Is it when you pull it and it bounces back. If you pull it and it stays stretched, the reason it's staying stretched out is because there is moisture in it. This skin is ready. It's dry. Our one final step now will be to smoke it, because if this was to be gotten wet, what's going to happen is it's going to dry. Here we're getting about ready to smoke. Here's our basic setup. On the left you have the stove in which we have a good fire, hot fire. Stovepipe coming out from that, which the smoke will be channeled through to the skin, which will hang from that tripod. Now we smoke with a hot smoke, which makes things go faster, but you have to be a lot more careful. Good hot fire, what we prefer. Here we're building a good bed of coals in the stove. A trash can could work, an inverted metal trash can could be utilized as a stove. When the fires burn down to the coals that we want, then we go and we bury it with rotten wood, punky wood. The stuff you don't want to use is firewood. This will smoke and smolder. Pretty smoky setup. You'd think, since we're going to the trouble of making a tape, that we'd have a better elbow to hook onto that stove, but it broke off on us. And so we're losing a lot of smoke out of the wrong end. But we're getting enough, sufficient smoke, up where we need it by the skin, that we're still going. We want to show you how sloppy we can do things and still make it work. Now, it doesn't take much smoke to accomplish the purpose of smoking. We have hung skins in robes, in furs, in smokehouse type affair, in a teepee, and pipe smoke in. And I used to smoke it for 3 solid days, not during the nights, but just the days, about 12 hours a day, and I was getting color. And being rushed one time and another time having a request for almost white skins, I smoked in one day, one 12-hour day. And what I did get was almost pure white skins. And we put them in a tub of water and they dried soft, which showed that what little smoke it got did the job. Now when we smoked the way we're doing here, with a hot fire, not so hot as to burn the skin. Jerry's feeling around to make sure that's not happening. But with a hot fire, we can smoke approximately 10 to 20 minutes per side. We'll smoke one side until we start to see color. Then we'll invert the skin and smoke the other. What we have done is we've sewed the skin into a cone. We know the neck is at the top yet. We sewed there down towards the base end of the deer. And that we left open. Onto that we sewed a skirt. The skirt absorbs some of the excess heat that's coming from the pipe. I've seen people smoke skins under very, very slow circumstances, taking 8 to 10 to 12 hours to smoke a skin. It's a slow smoke. It works. It just takes much longer. We're kind of lazy. We like to rush things out, so we smoke it with hot smoke. Hot smoke takes the color faster. It does the job faster. But the final result when we're done is a little bit more stiff than what you get from a slow smoke. But after the skin has been washed 2 or 3 times, you come back to your original softness. We show where we're using punky or rotten wood to smoke with. You're not limited to just that. We have used green leaves stripped off of trees. We've used grass, green grass. We've used green cedar boughs. I was a little afraid of the pine pitch coming from the cedar boughs, but it didn't seem to affect anything. The skin is beginning to show color through onto this side. That gives us an indication that it's getting close to time to invert it. Once you see smoke coming through this side, and then you can feel that the smoke has done its job at least halfway, then we'll check it on occasion and go for color. If we're not particular, we just go with any smudgy gray color, but we like to end up with a good brown, sometimes real dark and chocolatey, sometimes golden. Each particular smoking is different depending on the materials, the temperature of the fire, how much wind there is. Something you might try to remember is when you're replenishing your fuel source or your smoking source and you remove the lid from the fire, remove the skin from the pipe first, because we've had a sudden influx of oxygen go in and hit the fire chamber and send a burst of flame all the way up into the skins. Now it warped them and scorched them pretty badly and scared us pretty good, but we found that by throwing them in a bucket of water afterwards, that it almost 99% eliminated any permanent damage. You had some streakage of color was the only thing to show.
and on one small spot that was really badly scorched, it stayed stiff. And another tip, when you're adding materials for your smoking, don't stir it down in with your coal or your fuel source, or else you'll drown out your coal. Put your smoking material on top and spread only the very top stuff. And don't allow it, it'll settle down over and actually eventually burn. But don't stir up the coals themselves and mix it with the punky material, or you can drown out your fire. Now here, we're checking it only for the first time. It's only been smoking a little over 10 minutes, and you can see we've got plenty of color. We could smoke it longer and get it darker. This is like a chocolate brown, and this is what we're going to be happy to go with on this particular skin. Okay, the skin has been inverted now, and as much color as we had coming through, I'm certain that we could have gotten by without smoking this side of the skin at all. But we would like to not necessarily ensure the smoking, which we're confident we have, but we would like to have coloring on the inside of the skin comparable somewhat to what is on the outside. Well, here's the piece we just finished smoking. Pretty fine little piece, soft. But now you begin to wonder, what do I do with the skin now that it's tan? Well, we'll give you some ideas. Here's a dress. Just 3 skins into making that. There's a bow case and quiver. You're going to learn how to do that here pretty quick. How to make the bow and the arrows, so you might want to turn your skin into that. Here's a skirt that Jerry wears on occasion. She doesn't really go to town in it, but there's no reason why you can't make something to wear to town. This is some pretty fine material. Bags. These are particular bags. Been made from elk, painted up, teepee type bags. Pair of moccasins. Heck, moccasins, you can go through, several pairs a year. Top coat. I wear that wherever I darn well please. I sit around campfires with it, and I wear it in the restaurants. Here's a shorter jacket. Jerry wears the same places I wear mine. A real fine piece of material. And the smoke flavor doesn't necessarily follow you. After several washings it leaves. Here's a pullover shirt that I've made. I don't really wear that to town, but I wear it out quite a bit. A lot of field trips, camping trips. A pair of pants. Again, not something I would wear to town, but, why not? I know people who do. Now, we didn't get in to talking about tanning with hair on. We just barely touched it at one point. There's probably, on the larger skins, deer skins and elk robes and buffalo, any 10 times and up the amount of work. You'd think you're saving work by not removing hair. But the skin will not absorb from the hair side, and it will not dry from the hair side. And so you get many, many, many more hours of labor involved. Now this is a nice elk robe we've done. Pretty proud of it. Flexible. Makes a real fine piece of apparel. And you can see that it's not real clean. We use our stuff. So this pretty well shuts us up on buckskin. You should be able to go out now and you should have no problems whatsoever in turning out your own buckskin.